So something that's important to keep in mind in terms of how we define maltreatment. Corporal punishment, for example, is not considered abusive unless it results in an injury. So if a young person experiences bruises, marks, welts, broken bones, things like that, that would be considered abusive. Whereas something that does not result in an injury is generally speaking not considered to rise to that level of maltreatment. Statistics of prevalence, incidence, and outcomes related to maltreatment are limited by what we have data on. So it's widely recognized that a majority of child maltreatment goes unreported, but despite the limitations in what we can measure, about or over 500,000 children every year are assessed by the child welfare system. So a report is made to the state agency or local agency in charge of assessing maltreatment, and those children are found to have experienced maltreatment. That's a rate of about 7.7 children per 1,000 children in the population. So if you think about that in terms of the size of your town, the size of your community, the size of your children's school, that can give you a sense of what those numbers look like in the real world, what those numbers look like in your local setting. Of kids who were determined to have experienced maltreatment, and this is national data here, the majority experienced neglect. Neglect is very much the most widespread type of maltreatment that kids experience. And substantial minorities of youth experience physical abuse or sexual abuse. These numbers add up to over 100 because many victims experience multiple maltreatment types. But again, neglect is by far the most common and includes lack of access to adequate food, stable housing, a safe living environment, education, and other basic needs of childhood. And it also includes exposure to intimate partner violence, which is a significant risk for other maltreatment as well. While the parent who is the victim of domestic violence is most likely doing everything in their power to protect their children from the violence and from its impacts, witnessing a parent being harmed can be traumatic for children, and families experiencing domestic violence need services to help them achieve safety. And emotional and psychological abuse is not reported in these national statistics because state laws regarding emotional and psychological abuse are so different that we can't really aggregate that data at the national level to get a better sense of what it looks like. In the vast majority of cases, the person that's legally found responsible for maltreatment is a parent. That's because parents have the most responsibility for ensuring children's safety, and in a legal sense, they're kind of the person who is at fault, so to speak, because the definitions of maltreatment require that the person be in a caregiving role. So typically that's going to be a parent or another family member responsible for the child's care. So it could also be someone like a babysitter, a nanny, a child care provider, an educator, clergy, members of household staff, folks along those lines. But for the most part, maltreatment is something that happens in homes and in families. So that's where those numbers tend to come from. When we think about impacts of maltreatment, how does this impact a kid in the moment as well as moving forward? The most tragic potential outcome of maltreatment is a child fatality. This is thankfully quite rare. In 2022, the rate was 2.73 children per 100,000 children in the population. So it is not a frequent occurrence, thank goodness, but is definitely a tragedy every time it does occur. When we think about who's most at risk of that most tragic outcome, young children are our most vulnerable. 66% of fatalities due to maltreatment occur in children under 3 years, and 45% are in children under 1 year of age. Boys have a higher fatality rate due to maltreatment than girls. About 60% of deaths due to maltreatment are in boys, while 40% are in girls. And other impacts of maltreatment can include physical injuries, mental health needs, poorer school performance, increased vulnerability to illness, substance use, and involvement in criminal activity. Some of those are immediate, so physical injuries as a result of a physically abusive incident, while others are mediated through risk behaviors that are influenced by traumatic experiences. one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder can be excessive risk taking. So a difficulty with seeing the potential risks of an action that someone may take, which can put them at higher risk for um, uh, reckless behavior or potentially dangerous behavior like substance use or other excessive risk-taking behaviors. Maltreatment is an example of an adverse childhood experience. These are potentially traumatic experiences that occur in childhood and can impact long-term health outcomes, both in terms of our physical health and in terms of our mental health. So adverse childhood experiences include abuse and neglect, so physical, psychological, emotional, and sexual abuse, neglect and exposure to domestic violence, as well as untreated parent or caregiver mental health needs and substance use disorders that can impact parents' ability to be to respond in safe and effective ways to their children's needs. Excuse me. The ACEs studies, which date back to, I believe, the mid-90s, have a select set of questions that ask about childhood experiences. So things that a young person or things that a person may have experienced between the ages of 0 and 17. And these are retrospective studies. So it's asking adults to reflect back on experiences that they had during their own childhood. They look at questions related to the makeup of the household. So were there household members who were experiencing significant mental health needs or substance use issues? Did anyone experience incarceration? Were there breakups or separations of family members? And experiences of domestic violence, so adults getting into physical altercations. And they ask about physically abusive, sexually abusive, and psychologically abusive incidents as well. The ACEs studies also ask about protective factors. So these are, I want to plug this kind of throughout this discussion. While we know that there are things that put folks at higher risk of maltreatment, there are also protective factors that help a person to respond to difficult experiences that they've had in safe and healthy ways. So while someone who's in the household has the most potential to mitigate the potential harms related to maltreatment, so someone in your household who made you feel safe and protected, someone in your household who tried hard to make sure that your basic needs were met. Other caregiving adults can also have a huge impact in helping kids to recover and in mitigating those negative impacts. ACEs are incredibly prevalent. So 64% of adults, well over half, report experiencing at least one of those 11 childhood adverse experiences that we had on those two slides. And 17.3% report experiencing 3 or more. Despite these high rates, you may have noticed that those studies don't include other common sources of traumatic stress that children may experience, such as persistent bullying, community violence, natural disasters, refugee or wartime experiences, major injury or illness, and witnessing or experiencing acts of terrorism. So it really looks at your household and experiences within the household and within the family, and not on these larger community factors that can also result in pretty significant traumatic stress responses. The negative impacts associated with these ACEs are cumulative, meaning that the more ACEs an individual experiences, the more likely it is that they will experience negative outcomes as a result of that. So the effects of ACEs can add up over time in that cumulative way and affect a person throughout their life. Children who repeatedly and chronically experience adversity can suffer from toxic stress. Toxic stress happens when the brain endures repeated stress or danger and then releases fight or flight hormones like cortisol to respond to that threat. The internal alarm system that looks for danger, that helps us escape or fight off a dangerous situation, increases our heart rate and our blood pressure, and it can damage the digestive and immune systems because the body's stress response is adapted for short-term bursts of threat rather than a chronic stress exposure that a person is just living with day in and day out, whether in their home or in their community. Over time, chronic toxic stress can impact organ, tissue, and brain development and can alter a person's ability to process information, make decisions, and regulate emotions. And those consequences can last into adulthood. So that's where we see some of these physical health outcomes, increased risk for injuries, for problems related to pregnancy or maternal and child health outcomes, chronic illnesses, increased risk for depression, substance use disorders, and suicidal thoughts, and social outcomes like a lack of health insurance, unemployment, low educational attainment, due to the way that these experiences might impact a person's functioning in day-to-day life. While ACEs are experienced across all demographics, so this is not a problem that is solely the solely located within any one social group or socioeconomic group. There are folks who are at higher risk for having experienced quite a few more. So certain groups in adulthood reflecting back report experiencing more ACEs when they were children. The increased risk is likely due to a combination of factors, including systemic factors such as racism, discrimination, and poverty, as well as the impact of these ACEs on adult outcomes and intergenerational transmission of trauma. For example, people with ACEs that seriously impacted their physical or mental health may be unable to work, and that's why we see more ACEs in folks who are unemployed or unable to work. And systemic racism and discrimination that impacts specific communities, such as the American Indian and Alaska Native communities, puts additional stress on families in those communities and may result in increased risk for exposure to these ACEs. So we're going to talk a bit more about risk factors. So who are at the highest risk of experiencing maltreatment? And then we'll go into protective factors. How do we help kids? How do we protect kids? How do we insulate them from these experiences? So children are never to blame for being a victim of maltreatment, but researchers have identified child characteristics that increase the likelihood of abuse or neglect. So kids who are at higher risk of having these experiences. And the risk factors for maltreatment overlap with those risk factors for ACEs. Young age of a child is a significant risk factor. The youngest children are the most vulnerable to maltreatment. Over a quarter of victims are under 2 years, and about 15% are under 1 year as of national data from 2022. In general, the rate of victimization decreases as children age. So older kids are less vulnerable. Maltreatment rates are higher for girls, 17 kids per 1,000 children in the population in Massachusetts, than boys, which is 15 children per 1,000 children in the population. So not a huge discrepancy there, but it is a statistically significant difference. Black children and Indigenous children, which are represented in the census as American Indian or Alaska Native children, are overrepresented in the child welfare system as victims of maltreatment. Some of that is likely due to increased scrutiny of folks in those communities by certain child serving systems, but we know that these kids are at higher risk for having these experiences. And then other factors specific to the child, like children with special care needs, kids with physical disabilities, kids with emotional or behavioral disorders are at higher risk of maltreatment. And children who don't feel comfortable talking with caregivers about their feelings, who have trouble communicating, also put them at higher risk. There are also risk factors that are specific to the parent or the caregiver. Some of these are static risk factors. So these are things that don't change. They are, a historical fact of that person's life. And some are dynamic risk factors. So these are things that can be changed. And as parents and caregivers, as child supporting people, if we know what we're up against, we can act to close knowledge gaps. For parents who experienced maltreatment as children themselves, we can make the conscious decision to parent differently than how we were parented. So knowing that these risk factors are something that's going on for a family or going on for us ourselves in our own history can help us to make that conscious decision to change that cycle and to parent differently and to be a different kind of parent. When we think about limited knowledge of child development, so knowing what to expect from how difficult is toilet training going to be for my kid? At what age can they be left home alone and that be safe for them because they're developmentally old enough to handle it? Um, we really encourage folks to look for sources of knowledge in their community to address that limitation. So pediatricians, educators, the child's school, community behavioral health centers, and child mental health specialists like us can all be great sources of support and helping to address those knowledge gaps. Use of alcohol or other substances by a parent or caregiver, again, that's a dynamic risk factor, something that can be changed. So we know that problematic use of alcohol or other substances is present in almost half of cases of maltreatment in Massachusetts. So it is a huge risk factor, and it is one that has the potential to be changed. We can also think about risk factors that are present in the household, so not necessarily located at the level of the individual child or the individual caregiver, but something that is happening within that home environment. So things like domestic violence, inadequate housing, like housing that doesn't have running water, doesn't have access to power. These are things that can result in an increased risk for maltreatment. It's higher stress on the family. It's harder to meet basic needs if things like housing are such a huge barrier. Broadly speaking, community risk factors are characteristics of the neighborhood or community where a family lives. Communities with high rates of crime, high rates of poverty, and fewer opportunities see higher rates of maltreatment. Some of that might be attributable, again, to differences in the scrutiny placed on families in these communities, as families in more affluent neighborhoods are more likely to receive the benefit of the doubt and partially just may not be investigated at the level that families from less affluent neighborhoods may be. At the same time, communities with fewer opportunities and high poverty are linked to higher parental stress. And we know that families who are experiencing high parental stress are at increased risk for maltreatment. So that's our risk factors. Those are the things that increase the likelihood that a young person might experience maltreatment. But there are also protective factors, factors that are centered within the individual or the family or within the community or the system that help protect kids from having these experiences, that help families to navigate challenges differently. At the level of the individual and the family, we know that safe, stable, nurturing relationships within the family system, positive friendships and connections with folks outside of the family, mentors and role models, kids being able to look up to and spend time with safe and supportive adults, families that have access to basic needs and steady employment, and families that feel supported by their community and have social support connections. These are families that are better able to manage the stressors of life, such that maltreatment is less likely to occur. Families that are able to provide consistent structure and supervision, and caregivers who help children work through their problems, especially caregivers who are able to model handling conflict safely and peacefully, caregivers who are able to talk about their own emotions and model how to respond to emotions safely, families who spend fun time together and just enjoy each other's company, and families who place a high importance on school. These are all things that are protective factors for kids and for families. At the level of the community, having access to economic and financial help, so being able to connect with the Department of Transitional Assistance, having access to, say, a town social worker who can help families get connected with economic resources, who can help families get access to EBT or to SNAP benefits in order to meet those basic needs. Communities that have pediatricians, medical services, and mental health services that are located within the community and that are accessible both at a physical level and at a financial level for families. Communities that have lots of access to safe, stable housing that is financially affordable for families with young children, and communities that have nurturing and safe childcare and high quality preschools, as well as family friendly work policies such as earned sick time and paid sick leave so that if your child is ill, you can leave work and know that you won't have to make the call of, can I not feed my kid because I need to be home with my kid because they're sick. Communities that have engaging after school programs and community activities, safe locations for kids to be when they're not at home, if there is limited supervision, if parents are working, are there places where kids can go in the community, be safe, be protected? Are there community partnerships between businesses, healthcare, government, and the community? And places where residents feel connected to each other, where there is a sense of community values and where the community places a high value on nonviolence. So those are some of our protective factors, things that that help protect kids from having these experiences. So what can we do to increase protective factors for families to make sure that the majority of kids, as many kids as we can get, have access to these protective factors that will help them to help families to navigate stress and conflict safely and help kids to have safe childhoods. So all of these strategies that we're going to go into are founded in research. And these are strategies that research has found reduce rates of maltreatment. At the family level, caregivers can establish predictability around family routines and structure. For kids, especially young kids, predictability feels like safety. Knowing what to expect out of their day is a huge aspect of psychological safety for kids. Giving children positive attention for behaviors that we want to see and conveying interest with children when they communicate with us. I don't want that to be misinterpreted as meaning that you should be able to give your child 100% of your time, 100% of your attention. That's unreasonable. You would not be able to meet any of their other basic needs. But finding pockets of time to connect individually with the child and give them full attention during those pockets, even if it's 5 minutes. And families who can ask for help, knowing that they can reach out to family members, to close friends, to babysitters, to discuss concerns about their child's development or the stress that they're under or mental health needs with their child's doctor. Finding community support groups or programs for parents and caregivers. Some of these community behavioral health centers often offer formal or informal support groups for parents and caregivers, especially including for particular segments of the population. So grandparents as parents groups for grandparents who are primary caregivers. A lot of our community behavioral health centers in Mass offer support for caregivers as well. At the system level, so these are big policy things, strengthening families' financial security helps to prevent maltreatment because it means that families are able to access basic needs. It reduces likelihood of neglect because families are able to meet those needs. So we know that the Earned Income Tax Credit lifts families out of poverty, reduces infant mortality, improves health insurance access, improves children's school performance, and reduces parental stress and mental health problems. The Child Tax Credit reduces child behavioral problems, including physical aggression, anxiety, and hyperactivity that are linked to problematic behaviors later in life and are themselves risk factors for maltreatment. Paid maternity leave is protective against parental depression and abusive head trauma in children, and emerging evidence indicates that it's also protective against intimate partner violence. So families who have access to programs and services that help them to achieve financial security, to meet their family's basic needs, things like paid school meal programs, paid parental leave, raising the minimum wage, things that enable families to meet their children's needs. We also know that harsh physical punishment in childhood increases the risk for violence or for involvement in crime and for violence in adolescence and risk for perpetration of violence in adulthood, and is associated with mental health problems, lower academic performance, and lower self-esteem. Though legislation targeted at reducing corporal punishment is associated with decreases in community support for and use of harsh physical punishment. One of the treatments we really specialize in at the Baker Center, behavioral parent training, focuses on helping parents to implement effective disciplinary strategies that don't involve corporal punishment, and strategies that are typically more effective in managing behavior than corporal punishment is. At the level of early childhood services, affordable childcare reduces parental stress and depression, improves child behavior problems, and reduces rates of child maltreatment by parents as well as by substitute caregivers who may or may not be qualified, may or may not know much about child development. So having access to affordable, high quality early childhood care is incredibly important. Preschool children who receive high quality preschool enrichment with parental involvement start formal schooling, so kindergarten and beyond, with better math, language, and social skills, require less special education services as they grow, are less likely to be held back in school, and are more likely to graduate high school and college. High quality preschool programs are also associated with lower rates of substantiated maltreatment reports, lower rates of out of home placement, so a child entering the foster care system because the family is unable to keep them safe in the home, reduced rates of youth depression and substance use into adolescence, and reduced arrests and convictions into adulthood. So this is really an area where spending money on early childhood services saves us money down the road in terms of incarceration, in terms of mental health outcomes for adolescents and for adults. Medical and mental health services are a huge component of addressing things like parent mental health symptoms that might be impacting maltreatment, child mental health symptoms that might be increasing risk for maltreatment, and access to substance use services. Evidence-based practices for mental health services can be hard to access because they're expensive to train and expensive to implement. We at the Baker Center and many other organizations in our community offer sliding scales based on family income and number of dependents and some other factors to increase access to mental health services for kids and families. So the more that we can center medical and mental health systems and services in communities where families can access them, and the more that those things are accessible at an economic and financial level for families, the better those services will be able to serve our community. Domestic violence services should be survivor-centered and focus on helping families to achieve and maintain safety, including safe housing, access to trauma-informed services for both adults and children, and reducing policies that create barriers to access. So sometimes domestic violence services may have certain policies in place regarding involvement in legal proceedings or taking specific actions that the service requires in order for a person to access those services that can create unnecessary barriers. At the community level, it's crucial that we all develop a sense that children's safety is a shared responsibility. Parents need to know that help is available if they're struggling to meet basic needs or if they're struggling to manage their children's behavior. Skills-based parenting practices increase parents' sense of effectiveness and their ability to manage behaviors safely and effectively. So the more that parents are able to access those services, to learn some of these skills, the better the outcomes will be for kids and for families as a whole. I also want to emphasize that getting services for a family doesn't mean that the parent is the problem. So the fact that some of these strategies focus on, parenting strategies for managing stress, parenting strategies for managing child behavior problems, does not mean that the parent is the problem. Families need to be able to access support for positive parenting strategies in a non-shaming, non-blaming way that emphasizes parents are doing their best. That's why they're accessing these services. That's why they're trying to shift things and better meet their kids' needs. So communities can emphasize support for parents and support for those positive parenting strategies, healthy norms around, around gender, masculinity, and violence. And we can reduce stigma about help seeking. So quote unquote, needing to go to a parenting class or to do parent coaching or to find out different ways of parenting related to your child's specific behavioral or mental health needs should not be stigmatized. It should be celebrated. These are parents that are learning and growing in order to best meet their family's needs. We can enhance community connectedness and ensure that social emotional learning curricula for students in school. These reduce peer violence, reduce youth substance use, reduce rates of depression and anxiety, reduce suicidal thoughts and attempts, and reduce delinquency and criminal activity. And skills-based parenting and family relationship approaches reduce risk factors for child maltreatment and protect children from other forms of violence as well. Evidence-based treatment programs decrease child behavior problems, reduce high-risk substance use, or reduce youth substance use, including high-risk substances such as opioids, reduce physical fighting by children, reduce parental stress, depression, and family conflict, and improve parenting practices related to discipline, monitoring, and supervision. But once abuse or maltreatment has happened, how do we recognize and how do we support those kids? At the level of recognizing abuse, primary care practitioners, such as physicians, nurse practitioners, and physician assistants, are often some of our first line of identification because they may see signs of maltreatment in primary care visits. If we're seeing signs, screening should assess for risks such as parental substance use, untreated mental health needs, stress, use of harsh punishment, and intimate partner violence. Victim-centered services such as crisis intervention, hotlines, medical and legal advocacy, housing support, social support, and access to community resources can help mitigate harm following traumatic events. So if we're seeing these risks, we can connect folks with those victim-centered services in order to help them navigate next steps. Treatment for maltreatment starts by assessing how children have been impacted by their experience. So we assess for mental and emotional and behavioral health impacts of trauma, including post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, and disruptive behaviors. Then focuses on delivering trauma-informed, evidence-based practices to support recovery from mental and behavioral health problems, such as cognitive behavioral therapy to support coping, and behavioral parent training to promote skills-based parenting strategies to reduce future risk. Trauma treatment can be delivered effectively in individual formats, in group formats, and at the level of the dyad, so the parent and the child together. And I'll go into a little bit of some of those specific treatments quite briefly. And family-centered treatments for parental substance use disorders that combine evidence-based treatments for substance use with a range of preventive services that support the individual and the whole family can help families to move forward and to heal following maltreatment episode. We're going to cover a lot more information about treatments for trauma at our May seminar, including tools caregivers and providers can use to support kids after trauma. But I do want to touch on a couple of the treatments that we do offer and that are evidence-based out there. So trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy is an evidence-based treatment for children, adolescents, and young adults ages 3 to 21 impacted by trauma and a parent or caregiver. So a parent or caregiver or multiple parents or caregivers can participate in this treatment with the young person. It's a components-based treatment model that incorporates trauma-sensitive interventions with cognitive behavioral and family principles and techniques. It's been evaluated and found to be effective in addressing symptoms of PTSD, depression, and anxiety related to traumatic experiences. At the group level, cognitive behavioral intervention for trauma in schools, or CBITS, is a skills-based intervention pretty similar to TFCBT, but delivered in a group format aimed at addressing those same symptoms and has been evaluated in students from the 5th grade to the 12th grade, delivered in a small group with 6 to 8 students, typically in the school setting because that increases access to treatment for youth who may not otherwise have treatment available in their community. And Bounce Back is an adaptation of that CBITS model for students in kindergarten through 5th grade. At that parent-child level, Parent-child interaction therapy is a treatment program that works with caregivers to enhance parenting techniques for children 2 to 7 and has demonstrated effectiveness for a wide range of child mental health needs, including problems related to traumatic stress and maltreatment. And it works through building stronger and healthier caregiver-child connections, healing the impact of trauma, and reducing the likelihood of future maltreatment. And child parent psychotherapy is a therapy for young children, birth through age 5, along with their parents or caregivers, which works to treat trauma by supporting family strengths and relationships and helps families to grow and heal together after stressful experiences. I also want to plug some of our wonderful, wonderful community resources that we have access to. So family resource centers provide culturally responsive, family-centered services, including parent education, support groups, early childhood services, referrals, cultural events, and educational supports. And that is a Massachusetts-wide program. There are family resource centers in lots of communities across Massachusetts. Handhold MA is an online resource for families of children with mental health needs, including information on substance use and mental health, and a selection of vetted, trusted mental health organizations and support groups. And the Parent Professional Advocacy League offers family support for youth with mental health needs and juvenile justice involvement and helps to advocate for systemic change. Their staff members are primarily family members who have lived experience raising youth with emotional, mental, and behavioral health needs. And then community behavioral health centers. These are one-stop shops for a wide range of mental health and substance use problems. There are 25 community behavioral health centers located in communities across the state, which offer immediate care for mental health and substance use needs. So they have walk-in hours, they have crisis services, really a lot of wonderful services available to our communities. I also want to mention we may have parents in the room with us today whose children have experienced maltreatment. So if you're here, welcome. We're glad you're here. I want you to hear from us. Your family and your child can heal, grow, and move forward. Regardless of what your family or your child has experienced, you can be a wonderful parent and the parent that your child needs. This is hope, I hope. So we definitely encourage anyone to reach out to us for support. We have locations in Boston in the Mission Hill area, and we have a location in Waltham right near the Brandeis campus. You can reach us at bakercenter.org/CET or cet@bakercenter.org, or you could call us. We welcome anyone to reach out to us for access to mental health services. Again, we do have that sliding scale for folks, and we take some insurance policies as well. So thank you again for being here and being committed to this important topic. Hope to see lots of you at our May talk as well, talking more in depth about trauma-focused services for young people. My contact info is here. And I'm not just making this up, I do have references. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks for a fantastic talk, Sarah. So we'll open it up now to anyone who has any questions for Sarah.
Yes, Sarah, could you put up the reference slide again, just briefly?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any questions for Sarah? Sarah, it looked like there was a question around the prevalence of maltreatment in young kids. I did share a link to the blog post, but I think just the percentage of young kids, I think was the question.
Sure. Let me scroll back.
You answered it already. Sorry. Thank you, Michael. And then it looks like folks are interested in learning more about positive parenting skills or any groups that we might recommend to support that work.
Absolutely. In terms of positive parenting skills, a lot of it comes down to finding ways to connect. So we can think of it as a pyramid. So the positive parenting pyramid, the foundation of that pyramid is spending positive time together. So giving kids positive attention for the behaviors we want to see, finding ways to prioritize that connection, even in a busy world. And then moving more into focused behavior management, such as focusing on, I really want my kid to be kinder. Like it really bothers me when they are hitting their siblings and complaining and calling people names. So every time my kid says something kind or gentle or is helpful, I'm going to make sure I really give them lots of positive feedback for that. So focusing on using positive reinforcement as a way to increase the use of behaviors that we want our kids to be seeing, and then slowly moving up through limiting reinforcement to negative behaviors and non-harmful interventions for really severe negative behaviors like timeouts and things along those lines. In terms of groups, I don't have any off the top of my head because groups tend to, people move through groups, and sometimes they're closed groups that occur for a certain period of time, and sometimes they're groups that happen for a period and then dwindle away and then grow back. But I would definitely look into your local community behavioral health center and Handhold MA as resources for looking for groups that are in your local community. In terms of groups for kids, we are going to be running a CBITS group. So that's the small group trauma treatment for kids from about 5th grade to about 12th grade. We're going to be running a course of that over the summer in July and August. And we'll be running another one in the fall, probably in September and October and into November. So we do have some group-based programs for kids coming up.
We'll hang out a little longer and see if there's any questions. We're always looking for feedback on topics that folks would like to see or learn more about. We're happy to do customized talks for anyone who'd like more information. So thank you so much, Sarah, for teaching us a little bit about this really tough topic this morning. Stick around if you have any specific questions, and please consider joining us next weekend for our second annual Super where we'll be celebrating children's mental health awareness.